What? What's that you say? We've been looking at a lot of sculpture and you're bored? Okay, okay, I get it, I get it. Let's look at some architecture then. In fact, it is during the Archaic period that we see the birth of the Greek temple as we know it. It is in the Archaic period that architecture in Greece establishes a system of rules that will then be continued throughout the rest of the Greek culture. And then the Romans are going to come and they're going to take these rules, kind of mix them up. And then after the fall of the Roman Empire, others are going to look to these rules and either they're going to add them in or they're going to intentionally try to break these rules of architecture. Rules? I know. If you're interested in architecture, you're gonna love the Greeks because they have a system of rules for everything. We're not gonna get into it, but to scare you, here, these are just some of the standard temple styles. Whoa, 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 whoa. I know. Don't worry about it. We're just gonna do the basics for this art history class. And to learn the basics, we're going to look to this temple. This is the temple of Aphaia. It is in Aegina, Greece. Aegina is a small island just outside of Athens. Athens, there's Aegina. Now, the island served or was under the watch and protection of the city-state of Athens. And the temple here is to a minor goddess. Her name is Aphaia. She's more of a local goddess. I like this image because it helps you see there's Athens over there, and the temple is located on a natural outcrop of rock in the island of Aegina. So here we are standing in front of the temple of Aphaia, and I need you to use your imagination because a lot of it, most of it, is missing. We are standing in front of the temple, and if I pull back here, we were standing right here, we can still see the remains of the larger temple complex. So we're very familiar already with the idea that there is a temple and then there are buildings that serve to support the god or goddess and this temple structure. This line here is the barrier wall and would have kept everybody out of this sacred space. This area here is the precinct where the priests and priestess would have lived and kept the storage of treasury and food and supplies. This is a better example of it, or this is better drawing. So we're flipping it around. We're standing there. There's the front of the temple. The altar where the gifts and offerings would have been presented is in front of the temple, inside of the walled area. There is a larger ceremonial gatehouse, and then, as I said before, the administration buildings on the side. Like what we saw in Egypt and like what we saw in ancient Mesopotamia, you are not allowed inside. This is a temple to the god. You don't get to go inside. It is seen as a sacred space for those highly trained professionals. The god can occupy this temple, look out the front doors, and see the main altar where the priests and priestess would have their performance and their ceremonial offerings to that god or goddess. You and me, we ain't going inside. We stay outside of these walls. That is this is an example of a typical Greek temple and complex. Here, I just like this view too. So there is the front of the temple, the inside of the temple, and then the surrounding walls indicating the sacred space of this temple. Now, as I said, most of the temple is gone, and so we're going to need to use our imaginations when looking at temple architecture. A typical Greek temple would have a pitched roof. A pitched roof? What does that mean, Miss Cortez? Pitched means at an angle. It would have a slanted roof that would cover the entire space. And underneath this pitched roof would be a row of columns that would go all the way around. And then inside of that row of columns would be an enclosed space. Think of it like a building underneath a larger roof. And that enclosed space wouldn't have any windows. There would be front doors that would look out at the altar. Inside of this enclosed space would then be a statue of the god or goddess that this is dedicated to. And the idea being that the god or goddess could inhabit that statue in this temple, look out those doors at the altar. This entire space would have been brightly painted, the architecture too. So the surface or the exterior would have these elaborate patterns and colors on it as well. I'm going to show you an artist's restoration of this temple in a little bit. But first, let's look at this model of it to look at the inside. So this model here is showing you the sense of size or scale with a human figure here. And then it's been cut in half to show you the interior. So you see the pitched roof, it comes down and extends over the outside of the building. And then the building itself has a space for the statue, and it would probably be placed at the back end of this room, looking towards the front doors. The roof would be held up by double row of columns inside, so short columns and then taller columns would hold up the interior of the dome. And then, like I said, the walls would not have any windows, only those doors facing forward. Here's that artist restoration of the color. So the architecture would have been painted in these patterns that would have set ablaze the sculpture and the architectural elements. We're going to look more closely at the statuary that was placed inside this triangular area of the Temple of Aegina, or Temple of Aphaia at Aegina. Here, look at that. So here are some of those double row columns that were inside of the temple. And look at this, steps. So the temple doesn't sit directly on the floor or on the ground. It is elevated. You see it here? The temple is elevated off the ground. See it there? A platform that elevates the temple off of the ground. Yes, we've seen it before. We've seen it all the way back in Sumer. Ziggurats, right? Temples are raised off of the terrestrial world, our plane of existence, and they're lifted to be closer to the gods. Now, the Greek temples don't usually get this, high of a platform. Some will, but this one and most don't. But that three-stepped indication goes all the way around as a platform raising up the temple. Of course, remember, you and I are not walking around this space. Those stairs are there to elevate the temple closer to the gods. Our next image . Our next image is here. And this is the floor plan of the Temple of Aphaia at Aegina. And this is the floor plan that I'm going to be using in your exam. What? Yes. In fact, you know what I think I'm going to do right now? I'm going to pause and I'm going to make this its own video so that you can super study hard for your exam using the following images.